Hi, everyone, belonging to the Dallas Historical Society. I've been asked to speak about hospitals. They're definitely on the alert in these days. The very first county hospital in Dallas County was Parkland Hospital in 1894. The land where the hospital was built, where the land that was given to the hospital, belonged to the park department. So when the hospital was built on park land, it was named Parkland. It was a very, very humble wooden building, and on the corner of Maple and Oak Lawn, and there it was, 1894. By 1913, a brick building was built there, and that building still remains. It belongs now to the Crow people, the Crow Holdings, and Trammell Crow's company has built a marvelous, beautiful building there, including that original Parkland Hospital. It's a very famous hospital because it has some very famous patients, one being President John Kennedy. And also, of course, then later, Oswald was taken to Parkland. And then a tragic event in Dallas in 1988 when the Delta plane crashed at the airport and the people were taken, the injured people were taken to Parkland Hospital, which then and today has one of the greatest burn centers, curing people with bad burns, trauma center. Now, the hospital was moved in 1954 over to Harry Hines, and there's where it is today, serving Dallas County. The neighborhood of the original, that Parkland Hospital, the original, that's Oak Lawn, Maple. It has always housed many doctors. That was 1894, the beginning of a county hospital. Now, a new hospital. This was in 1898. The Sisters of Charity. These were the nuns that wore those big bonnets. They were scary looking. The Sisters of Charity, founded in France in the 1600s. They served the poor, the needy. They gave their lives to helping others, and they were called Sisters of Charity. And they were brought to the United States in 1803 by Mother Seton, S-E-T-O-N, one of our saints of the United States. And she brought the Sisters of Charity. And in 1898, the Sisters of Charity were brought to Dallas, Texas, and St. Paul Hospital was built. Beautiful building on Live Oak. It's no longer there, but old Dallas folk, we can remember the original St. Paul Hospital. My mother loved to tell this story when she visited a lady who had just had a baby, and the baby was brought into the room to the mother with the visitor. Of course, nobody cared about germs in those days. The baby was brought in, and this mother said, they tell me that newborn babies cannot hear. Well, one of those big doors that was built in that magnificent structure of St. Paul, red brick, big windows, big doors. One of those doors slammed, and that baby jumped almost out of the arms of that woman. And she said, they hear. Definitely. I'm telling this story to show you how massive that building was. That huge, great, big building of St. Paul Hospital. And the Sisters of Charity in their big bonnets, they were scary looking. I thought so. Many did. But they were the ones that gave their lives to helping others at St. Paul. That's 1898. In 1903, Dr. George W. Truett, who came to be pastor of First Baptist Church, Dallas, Texas, had a goal. He wanted to build a Baptist hospital. And he had to get that money. And Colonel C.C. Slaughter, a member of First Baptist, had a lot of money. And Dr. Truett convinced him to build a hospital. Dr. C.C. Slaughter paid for the building of the hospital. But they couldn't call it Slaughter Hospital. That wouldn't be. So it was called the Texas Baptist Memorial Sanatorium. And it was built in 1903. There on Gaston and Hall. And there it was named later on Baylor Hospital in 1918, when Baylor University came with their medical school and the dental school and the dental hygienist school and the nursing school, and all of this was under Baylor Hospital and the Baptist. George W. Truett. Thank you, George W. Truett. Now, Mr. Hobitzel, who was in the showbiz, owned the Majestic Theater. He gave money, and eventually there was other buildings added, such as the George W. Truett Memorial. It's still there at Baylor. And the Hobitzel. Now, Florence Nightingale, where so many babies were born, is no longer there. But the hospital complex, Baylor Hospital, now owned by Scott and White. They were the big hospital in Temple, Texas, that served all of the railroad employees. They are now part of Baylor Hospital, Scott and White. There was a superintendent of schools in Dallas by the name of Justin Ford Kimball. Dr. Kimball felt so sorry for his school teachers because they were so poor they couldn't afford to go to the hospital. They just had to die. And Dr. Kimball said, wait a minute, I'm going to fix this. And he took a quarter from every one of the Dallas teachers every month, put it in a plan called the Baylor Plan, and told them, now, when you're sick, you can go to the hospital. It's prepaid. In other words, he created hospitalization. And that Baylor Plan became Blue Cross, Blue Shield, that was founded there at Baylor by the Baptist. Now, just down the street from the Baptist Church there on Irvay, at where the Thanksgiving Square is now, across the street, was a huge, marvelous building built called the Medical Arts Building. And on the top floors was a clinic owned and operated by Dr. W. W. Samuel, the Samuel Clinic. It was well known. Dr. Samuel loved the Parks Department, and he gave his land to the Parks Department. That's Samuel Grand Land, and also Samuel Park on Highway 80. Samuel Clinic. Now that big building, the Medical Arts Building, was torn down in the late 1970s because I remember my son, for a summer job, was working for the wrecking company that was going to tear down the medical arts building. And he came home one day and he said, "Mother, those poor dear doctors, they don't want to leave. They want to stay at the medical arts building." But they had to leave, and the building was torn down, and it took a lot of effort to do just that. And the Samuel Clinic was no more. Well, in 1921, a group of men at First Methodist Church decided Dallas needed a hospital, another hospital. And they got together, and in 1924, on Colorado in Oak Cliff, Methodist Hospital was opened. They had what was called the Golden Cross Ministry. And they took up a collection, money, and built the hospital with the Golden Cross on the top. That was in 1924. Now in 1999, Methodist Hospital was 75 years old. And I was asked to speak at that celebration. And there, having been open for 75 years, one of their first patients was there. 75 years? She was young. She was only 75. She was the first baby born at Methodist Hospital that survives beautifully today on Colorado, and then a branch hospital there in South Oak Cliff on Camp Wisdom Road. Now we can't forget the Presbyterians. They owned a bunch of land at Walnut Hill Lane and Greenville, and in 1966 built this marvelous hospital, Presbyterian Hospital. And it's there, of course, serving today. I have a story about their latest addition. My husband died in hospice at Presbyterian. Hospice, Presbyterian. And I wrote a letter thanking them for the beautiful service that they gave to him in his last days on this earth. And they contacted me and said, "Your letter is perfect. We're going to send it to T. Boone Pickens, who's planning to give us some money, maybe, for a hospice hospital. And your letter tells exactly what we want to say to Mr. Pickens." I said, "Well, use it, of course." Mr. Pickens gave $80 million for a hospice hospital. Now, there was a luncheon held to honor Mr. Pickens, and they asked me to come and read the letter, which I did. And Mr. Pickens said, "Now, Presbyterians, I've given you $80 million. I would like to give you more, but there's 3 reasons I can't. Number 1, I just don't have any more money to give away at this time. And the other 2 reasons do not matter." So the great T. Boone Pickens Hospice Hospital is there off of Forest Lane across from Medical City. Dallas is well taken care of by these marvelous hospitals, plus many more. The Lord has blessed us.